Sergeant Emily Carter pushed open the heavy wooden door of Murphy's bar, and the smell of fried food, stale beer, and cigarette smoke hit her instantly. She paused at the threshold, letting her eyes adjust to the dim lighting. The room was smaller than she expected, the tables pressed close together, and the walls lined with faded photographs of the town's history, mostly high school football teams and dusty hunting trophies. For a moment, she hesitated, aware that her presence in her crisp Marine uniform was immediately noticeable. The eagle tattoo creeping from the sleeve of her fatigues caught the attention of more than a few patrons, sparking murmurs and sideways glances that made her chest tighten slightly. Emily had seen these reactions before. People often looked at her uniform with awe or curiosity, but it was different when the tattoo showed. Some seemed to mock, others seemed uneasy, as if they were afraid to acknowledge a woman who had endured what few civilians could imagine. The eagle, clutching an olive branch and soaring across her forearm, wasn't just a design. It was a personal memorial, inked in memory of comrades she had lost in Afghanistan. Each feather represented someone she had fought alongside, each line a reminder of survival, sacrifice, and the fragile peace she worked so hard to uphold. Taking a deep breath, she stepped further inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath her polished boots. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, nodded in recognition. "Evening, Sergeant. Long day?" His voice carried neither judgment nor awe, just familiarity. Emily offered a small, tired smile in return. "Evening." "Yeah, long." She moved toward the bar, careful not to brush against anyone, but fully aware of the quiet tension her entrance had created. The room's chatter slowed, conversations halting mid-sentence. It wasn't unusual for townsfolk to stare at Marines. They were an institution of respect, but her presence, combined with the visible tattoo, seemed to draw more attention than normal. Emily scanned the room as she approached a vacant stool. A group of men in the corner, all with rough denim jackets and unshaven faces, were clearly sizing her up. Their smirks were subtle but calculated, and she immediately sensed the brewing challenge. She'd faced hostility before, in boot camp, in foreign territories, even from fellow service members, but something about this casual, confident mockery made her blood run cold. She ignored them, settling onto the bar stool with perfect posture, sliding her duffel bag carefully under her feet. "What you drinking?" the bartender asked. His tone was conversational, but he seemed to anticipate trouble. Emily ordered a water first, then a beer, wanting to let the atmosphere settle before engaging. She had no intention of causing a scene. In combat, every move was calculated, every reaction measured. She intended to carry that discipline into civilian life, even when confronted by ignorant remarks or sideways judgments. The men in the corner chuckled quietly, exchanging looks that made it clear they were preparing to test her. "Hey, Marine," one of them called out after a moment. Leaning back in his chair, "What's that on your arm?" "Looks funny." His voice carried a note of mockery, laughter trailing at the edge. Emily's jaw tightened. She had long ago learned to control her temper, to never let ignorance dictate her reactions. She sipped her water slowly, giving him the barest acknowledgement. A calm glance, neutral, unflinching. The bar seemed to hold its breath. Emily's silence was louder than any retort she could have offered. Patrons shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or watch. Emily had long ago realized that courage wasn't always about drawing a weapon. Sometimes it was about standing firm in the face of ridicule, about refusing to let petty contempt undermine years of service and personal sacrifice. Her tattoo was a piece of her identity, a testament to her journey, and she would not allow it to be trivialized. Memories began to surface as the men continued to whisper and snicker among themselves. Afghanistan, the desert heat, The relentless sun burning down on the convoy, the dust clinging to uniforms and skin. She remembered the adrenaline rush of early morning patrols, the quiet moments at night when the distant gunfire seemed to fade, and the camaraderie of soldiers who became family in the absence of home. The eagle on her arm had been inked after her first tour, a memorial for Corporal Daniels, who had saved her life during an ambush. Each line represented more than artistry. It was survival, grief, and remembrance inked permanently into skin. Emily's mind wandered briefly to the people she had lost, the friends she had held as they took their last breaths. The trauma was heavy, but the tattoo served as a daily reminder of the resilience she and others had cultivated. She knew that some civilians would never understand the weight of such symbolism, the quiet power of memory carried visibly on the body. Yet she also understood that respect often had to be earned silently, through composure, through bearing, through quiet acts that demonstrated one's character without shouting it. The laughter from the corner group grew slightly louder, and one of the men leaned forward, his smirk widening. "So, you just wear that thing to scare people, or what?" Emily's fingers tightened briefly around her glass. She considered her options. Engage verbally, ignore, or wait for a more opportune moment. Her training kicked in. In combat, patience often saved lives. Here, patience preserved dignity. She remained still, exuding calm. The contrast between her disciplined composure and their rowdy antics seemed to magnify the tension, drawing the attention of other patrons who had been murmuring quietly among themselves. A young man at the next table shifted uncomfortably, whispering to his friend about the tension in the air. "I don't think she wants trouble," he said, clearly intimidated. Emily caught his eye briefly, offering a small, reassuring nod. Even strangers could sense the quiet authority she carried, a presence honed through years of training, missions, and hardship. She wasn't trying to dominate the room, but her very demeanor demanded acknowledgement, an acknowledgement that respect was due whether one understood it or not. Emily's gaze drifted toward the bartender again. He gave her a subtle look, one that conveyed solidarity without judgment. She took a long sip of water, letting the calm wash over her. She didn't need approval, but she recognized the unspoken support of those around her. Each moment she endured without flinching reinforced her control, her inner strength, and her identity as a Marine. She was no stranger to adversity, whether from hostile territory, harsh commands, or civilian misunderstanding. Tonight, the challenge was different, but it required the same principle: patience, dignity, and quiet confidence. As she glanced at her reflection in the bar mirror, Emily noticed the eagle tattoo catching the faint light, its wings spread in frozen motion. It seemed almost alive, a silent sentinel watching over her. The men in the corner paused briefly, noticing it again, their earlier bravado slightly faltering. Emily allowed herself a small inward smile. They had no idea what it truly represented: the battles, the losses, the courage woven into each line. They only saw ink. She saw a story of survival and remembrance. Minutes passed. The atmosphere remained tense but controlled. Emily's calm presence acted as a magnet for the eyes in the room. Patrons began whispering quietly, some offering subtle nods of respect, others simply watching, curious. The bar had become a silent stage. The mockery paused, waiting for something to break the stalemate. Emily sipped her water again, a deliberate act of patience. She was ready to face whatever came next, armed not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who had confronted far greater dangers than a group of drunken jeers. And as the first notes of a country song began playing on the jukebox, Emily leaned back slightly, letting her composure radiate outward. The bar's energy shifted imperceptibly, as if it sensed that this Marine, with her uniform and her eagle tattoo, carried more than physical presence. She carried stories, resilience, and the unspoken command of experience, whatever happened. Next, she was prepared. The night was just beginning, and every pair of eyes in the room had already taken notice. The quiet murmur of the bar was suddenly punctuated by laughter from a corner table. Emily's attention shifted. A group of men, clearly locals, had been watching her since she walked in. Now, emboldened by alcohol and camaraderie, they had decided to confront her. One man, broad-shouldered and red-faced, leaned forward, resting an elbow on the table. "Hey, Marine," he called, his voice carrying across the room. "What's that on your arm? Looks ridiculous." His friends snickered behind him, elbowing one another and grinning, as though the moment was a private joke shared at her expense. Emily's jaw tightened. She remained seated, letting her fingers rest lightly around the stem of her water glass. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't give him the satisfaction of an immediate reaction. The calm in her posture drew even more attention than the man's taunt. The rest of the patrons glanced around, sensing the tension, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Emily had encountered hostility many times during training, overseas, in the most dangerous zones, but casual, unprovoked ridicule had a different sting. It was personal, invasive, and she realized, rooted in ignorance. The man took a step closer, leaning toward her with a smirk that tried to mask underlying insecurity. "Seriously," he said, louder this time. "You think that's cool? A tattoo and a uniform? Bet you think you're some kind of hero or something." Emily inhaled slowly, feeling the familiar rise of controlled anger, the kind she had mastered in years of discipline. Her training reminded her that patience and composure were far more powerful than verbal retaliation. Her eyes scanned him. Briefly. His clothing was ill-fitting, his hair unkempt, his hands fidgeting slightly, as though he sensed he was overstepping, but didn't know how to stop. Emily's gaze was calm, precise, unyielding. She could see it all, the fear, the bravado, the uncertainty hidden behind the laughter. It reminded her of insurgents she had faced overseas. Bluster masking weakness, aggression masking insecurity. She remained seated, silently communicating through her posture and presence that she would not be intimidated. The laughter from his friends grew louder, a nervous, false confidence that filled the room like a wave. Emily's thoughts drifted, briefly to her squad in Afghanistan, the way they had relied on each other for courage and protection. She remembered Private Torres, who had joked under fire to keep spirits alive. Corporal Daniels, whose quiet bravery had saved lives. Every laugh and sneer at her tattoo was an echo of trivial misunderstandings she had often encountered outside. Military life, they couldn't know, couldn't understand. The eagle on her forearm wasn't decoration. It was a chronicle of survival and sacrifice. Emily took another slow sip of water, letting the silence hang in the air. The man leaning toward her frowned at her lack of reaction, his smirk faltering slightly. "Hey," he said, voice tinged with frustration. "Say something." He tried to assert dominance, the way soldiers assert presence in a hostile environment. But Emily had no intention of rising to the bait. Her silence was deliberate, a signal of unshakable resolve. The tension in the bar thickened, spreading to the nearby tables. Patrons turned their heads subtly, trying not to stare, but unable to look away. The man's friend nudged him, whispering something that Emily couldn't quite hear. She observed the subtle exchange, the hesitation, the doubt creeping in. Her training taught her to read body language quickly. His eyes flicked to the exit. His hands flexed and relaxed. His jaw tightened and relaxed. The bravado was a fragile veneer. Emily, seated with perfect posture, composed and unwavering, radiated an authority that seemed to absorb the room's attention. She was a Marine, yes, But more than that, she was someone who had faced danger, grief and chaos, and who now commanded presence simply by existing. The man straightened suddenly, frustration mounting. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a sneer. "You think your little tattoo makes you special? You think your uniform means anything?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Her mind reviewed her options: verbal defense, ignoring entirely, or waiting for the right moment. She chose to wait. Waiting, she reminded herself, was often the most powerful tactic. Her restraint was not weakness. It was quiet strategy, a subtle challenge to the man's insecurity. As the man's voice rose again, a few patrons shifted uneasily, exchanging uncertain glances. One older gentleman, sitting at a nearby table, muttered under his breath, "Don't provoke her. You don't know what you're dealing with." Emily caught the whisper, grateful for the quiet solidarity. The small gestures of acknowledgement from strangers carried more weight than the laughter from the corner table. She remembered similar moments overseas. Allies who understood without speaking, whose presence alone provided strength. The man, undeterred, tried a different approach. He gestured to the tattoo. "Looks like some bird or something. You got that inked to show off?" His tone was mocking, but Emily recognized it as fear masquerading as ridicule. She leaned back slightly, relaxed, letting her calm demeanor amplify his discomfort. The air in the bar seemed to crackle. Even the bartender paused mid-motion, carefully, polishing a glass, watching how the confrontation unfolded. Emily's thoughts drifted to her squad again. She remembered nights when they had joked to ease tension, when laughter had been a weapon against fear. She realized this man's attempt at humor was clumsy, misplaced, an attempt to assert dominance in a space he didn't control. Her tattoo, she reminded herself, was a declaration of identity, resilience, and memory. No drunken mockery could diminish its meaning. Each feather, each line, told a story of courage, of comrades lost and remembered, of survival in the harshest conditions. The corner man's smirk faltered further. Emily could see the uncertainty creeping in, his bravado slipping under the weight of her calm. He tried to force a laugh, but it sounded hollow. His friends, sensing the shift, glanced at him nervously. For the first time, the group's confidence wavered. Emily, aware of their subtle panic, remained seated, sipping her water slowly, exuding quiet authority. Her presence was a shield, a silent command that respect was due. A young man nearby, who had been watching quietly, whispered to his companion, "I don't think she's going to respond, and I don't think you want her to." The observation seemed to ripple through the room. Patrons shifted uneasily, sensing that the balance of power had subtly changed. The mocking man's aggression had lost its edge. Emily's silence, her composed posture, and her unwavering gaze communicated more than words ever could. The eagle tattoo was no longer just a design. It had become a symbol of authority, of discipline, and of stories untold. The bartender finally broke the silence. With a quiet, respectful nod toward Emily. "Water okay?" he asked, his tone neutral, but supportive. Emily offered a small, polite smile in return. The gesture, though minimal, reminded her of the subtle bonds humans shared even in tense situations. Allies sometimes revealed themselves in whispers, nods, or small acts of acknowledgement. She recognized it immediately, drawing strength from the quiet solidarity around her. The corner man, realizing that the room no longer supported him, attempted one last verbal jab. "Bet you think everyone's staring, 'cause you're some kind of tough hero." Emily set her glass down, eyes steady, voice calm but firm. "I'm not here for approval. I'm here because I'm allowed to be just like anyone else. Respect isn't demanded, it's recognized. Some of you might understand it someday." Her words, measured and precise, cut through the tension like a blade, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The bar seemed to exhale. The laughter had faded, replaced by quiet murmurs of acknowledgement. Emily's quiet authority had shifted the room's energy. Patrons who had been hesitant now watched with curiosity and respect, while the corner table's bravado faltered entirely. Emily's tattoo, the symbol of her journey, now commanded the attention and respect it deserved. The man's face reddened, his voice faltering. The subtle lesson was clear. Courage, composure, and dignity could transform even the most hostile. Atmosphere. Minutes passed. The jukebox played softly in the background, the tension slowly dissipating. Emily took a long sip of water, her posture relaxed but alert. She was ready for whatever came next. The corner group had lost its momentum, and the room had shifted from ridicule to quiet recognition. Emily knew the night was far from over, but she had already won the first, crucial battle. She had asserted her presence, her dignity, and the silent power of her story. The laughter had faded, replaced by a tense quiet that stretched across Murphy's bar. Emily Carter's fingers rested lightly on her glass, her knuckles pale but relaxed, as if the water itself grounded her. Yet beneath that calm exterior, her mind drifted far from the bar's dim interior to the blazing deserts of Afghanistan. The sights, smells, and sounds of deployment resurfaced unbidden, as vivid as if she were standing in the heat once more. She remembered her first tour vividly. The sun hung low over a dusty village, casting long shadows across the sand. Convoys rumbled along dirt roads, armored vehicles clanking as soldiers moved with precision and caution. Emily had been only 21, her uniform stiff, boots caked in dust, and every nerve alert for threats hidden in the seemingly empty landscape. The adrenaline, the fear, and the constant awareness of danger had honed her instincts. Every sound, every movement had been scrutinized, analyzed, and remembered. The tattoo now on her forearm had been inked shortly after that tour, an eagle clutching an olive branch, a symbol of survival, hope, and the memory of those she had lost. She could still see Corporal Daniel's face, calm under fire as bullets whizzed past during an ambush. He had been her anchor, the steady presence that allowed her to keep moving when the world seemed to collapse. He had died a few months later, during another mission, and Emily had felt the unbearable weight of grief, compounded by the impossibility of preventing it. The tattoo had been her silent tribute to him, to every comrade who didn't return, a visible reminder of sacrifice and resilience that she carried wherever she went. As she sipped her water, Emily's mind returned to the bar, the faces of the mocking men blurry at the edges of her memory. Their jeers seemed insignificant compared to the cacophony of gunfire, the cries of wounded soldiers, and the desolate loneliness of a foreign desert. Yet she also realized that ridicule in this environment was different. Here, the battlefield was social. The weapons were words, the tension psychological. The stakes were not life or death, but dignity and respect. And though she had faced death itself, Emily understood that true courage was the same in any arena. Composure under pressure, strength in the face of provocation, and grace under scrutiny. The eagle tattoo on her forearm caught the faint light of a flickering bulb, and Emily traced the outline with her eyes, remembering every detail of the design. Each feather was deliberate, etched in memory as much as in ink. She thought of the small victories, the moments when a life was saved, a mission completed against impossible odds, a friend protected. The tattoo was more than a memorial. It was a visual chronicle of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Each glance at it reminded her of the resilience she had cultivated, not just physically but emotionally, in the face of repeated trauma and adversity. The bartender, a quiet observer, refilled her glass without a word, acknowledging her presence without intruding. Emily allowed herself a brief, grateful nod. Small gestures of solidarity were often overlooked, yet they carried profound weight. In Afghanistan, she had learned to read allies in subtle expressions, in the tilt of the head, the steadying of hands, or the quiet reassurance of a glance. Here, the bartender's nod mirrored that understanding, a recognition of experience, endurance, and silent authority. Emily drew strength from these minor acknowledgments, letting them bolster her confidence while maintaining her composure. Meanwhile, the men who had mocked her earlier were shifting in their seats. Their confidence, once loud and brash, now faltered in the face of her unwavering presence. Emily could see it in the way they fidgeted, in their nervous glances, in the slight tightening of their jaw muscles. They had assumed power in numbers, assuming that ridicule could provoke weakness. But Emily had faced greater hostility, far more dangerous than a group of drunk locals. Their mockery was trivial compared to the fire, bullets, and chaos she had endured. The shift in the room was subtle, yet unmistakable. As she observed them, memories of her squad rose unbidden. She remembered Private Torres, always joking in the darkest moments to lighten spirits. His humor had been a lifeline during long nights in enemy territory. She remembered the careful way they had relied on one another, watching each other's backs, interpreting every movement, every glance, as a message of protection. She had been trained to survive physically, but she had also learned to survive emotionally, to carry grief, fear, and hope with a kind of quiet resilience that made her stronger, more present, more commanding. Emily's tattoo was not simply ink. It was a story, a reminder of that emotional and physical survival. She could feel the weight of it in the room, sensing that some patrons were beginning to understand, even subconsciously, that this symbol represented far more than artistic flair. The eagle was a sentinel, a silent observer of courage and sacrifice. The men who had mocked it could not comprehend its significance, but others in the bar, watching quietly, sensed the authority and strength it conveyed. The corner man, still, trying to maintain a semblance of control, leaned back and laughed weakly, attempting to reclaim dominance. "Bet you think everyone's staring 'cause you're some kind of hero," he said, voice trembling slightly. Emily set her glass down carefully, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here for your approval," she said evenly, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm here because I'm allowed to be just like anyone else. What I carry on my arm is my story, my experience, and my memory. Respect is not demanded, it's recognized by those willing to see it." Her words hung in the air like a physical presence, a wave of authority that rippled across the room. Patrons exchanged glances, some nodding slightly, others murmuring. Quietly, the tension that had filled the bar moments ago began to shift. The men who had mocked her now felt the weight of history, of experience, of lived reality pressing down on them. Emily had transformed the space with her calm presence, her quiet strength, and the silent power of her story. Her mind drifted briefly again, remembering nights in the desert where courage was tested in the smallest details. The careful clearing of a building, the silent passing of water to a wounded comrade, the quiet moments when fear threatened to overwhelm but was tempered by discipline and camaraderie. The eagle tattoo carried all those moments with her. Each line was a reminder of who she had been, what she had survived, and what she had become. It was proof of resilience, endurance, and unwavering focus under pressure. Even in this civilian setting, the principles remained the same. Patience, composure, courage, and dignity were universal. Emily could see it in the way the bar now reacted. How whispers replaced laughter, how subtle nods of acknowledgement appeared among patrons. She drew confidence from these quiet affirmations, aware that she was not alone, even in a space far removed from her squad. The history of service, sacrifice, and survival was invisible to most, but Emily carried it like armor, unbreakable and undeniable. As she sipped her water once more, Emily allowed herself a small, inward smile. The corner man's bravado was waning, replaced by uncertainty. The room's energy had shifted. The once lively taunting had lost its power. Emily's silent strength, bolstered by memories of service and loss, had transformed the atmosphere. She realized that courage did not always require a weapon or a loud declaration. Sometimes it was embodied in presence, in patience, in quiet assertion of one's dignity and worth. The jukebox played softly in the background, the notes of a distant country ballad filling the empty spaces between tense silences. Emily's gaze swept the room, noting the subtle shifts the patrons, who now watched with respect, the men who had tried to provoke her, now shrinking under her quiet authority. Her tattoo, once a target of ridicule, had become an emblem of strength, resilience, and memory. And she, Sergeant Emily Carter, had demonstrated that true courage and respect are earned not by shouting, but by enduring, surviving, and embodying one's principles with unwavering resolve. The tension in Murphy's bar thickened like smoke from a smoldering fire. Emily Carter sat at the bar, calm yet alert, her hands resting lightly on the counter. The laughter of the men in the corner had dwindled, replaced by an uneasy silence. That only heightened the room's intensity. Every eye seemed to flicker between Emily and the group, some curious, some apprehensive. Emily's eagle tattoo, partially revealed under her rolled-up sleeve, glinted faintly under the dim lights, an emblem of experience and sacrifice that no amount of mocking could diminish. The largest of the group, a broad man with a thick neck and a perpetual sneer, pushed himself upright from the table. He had exhausted subtlety and was now leaning directly toward Emily. "You think that tattoo makes you some sort of hero, huh?" he jeered, voice laced with condescension. His friends snickered nervously, sensing that the atmosphere had shifted in Emily's favor, yet unsure how to regain control. Emily's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she didn't flinch. Her mind, trained for threats far deadlier than drunken ridicule, assessed the situation like a tactical scenario. Her options were clear: ignore, respond calmly, or stand her ground with quiet authority. She chose the third. Her calm composure radiated outward, an invisible shield of discipline and confidence that contrasted sharply with the group's jittery aggression. "I'm not here to entertain your judgment," Emily said evenly, her voice calm, yet carrying a firmness that made heads turn. "I wear this tattoo as a tribute, not for your amusement. It represents memory, resilience, and service. Something you'll likely never understand, but it doesn't matter. Respect is earned through character, not mockery." Her words were deliberate, measured, precise. Each syllable landed with the weight of experience, carrying the authority of someone who had faced far greater threats than drunken taunts. The man leaned closer, trying to intimidate her, though his movements were now slightly hesitant. "You think that uniform and ink make you untouchable?" he scoffed. Emily's eyes locked onto his, steady, unwavering. Her gaze carried the silent weight of discipline, survival, and unflinching courage. He faltered, blinking rapidly as the full magnitude of her presence hit him. Her composure was not arrogance, it was earned authority, radiating from decades of hardship, battle, and training. Around the bar, patrons shifted in their seats, watching the unfolding confrontation. Some whispered quietly, impressed by her control. A few of the more observant customers began to sense the subtle power dynamics at play. Emily was not merely defending herself. She was commanding the room through her presence alone. The corner man's friends glanced at one another, their bravado waning. They had underestimated her resolve, and now the room reflected that imbalance. Emily's mind flicked back to memories of combat, where similar situations had required patience and precision. She recalled a patrol ambushed near a ridge, the enemy advancing with lethal intent. Reacting impulsively would have cost lives. Instead, she had remained calm, read the situation, and acted with measured strategy. The same principle applied here. Words were weapons, mockery a test, and she wielded her silence and poise as her shield. The man, sensing his weakening position, attempted another tactic: proximity. He leaned closer, invading personal space in a transparent effort to intimidate her physically. Emily did not flinch. She adjusted her posture slightly, subtly asserting her dominance without aggression. The eagle tattoo was fully visible now, wings outstretched as if guarding her stance. The symbolism was not lost on anyone observing. To Emily, it was a reminder of survival, strength, and the countless lives she had protected, both abroad and within herself. One of the men whispered something to his neighbor, their voices low but anxious. Emily caught fragments. Maybe? We shouldn't push. The faltering of confidence was palpable. Her calm demeanor had eroded the perceived power of the group. The bar, once tense with anticipation, now held a fragile equilibrium, balanced on the strength of Emily's silent authority. Patrons who had been unsure now observed with respect, some leaning forward subtly, intrigued by the quiet mastery of the moment. Emily's gaze scanned the room briefly, taking note of the subtle cues from other patrons. The bartender, polishing a glass, offered a faint nod of encouragement. Nearby, a young couple shifted in their seats, glancing at her with quiet admiration. Each small gesture reinforced her control, silently confirming that her approach patience, poise, and strategic silence was effective. She had turned a potential confrontation into a lesson in dignity, courage, and composure. The largest man, desperate to reclaim dominance, attempted one final verbal jab. You really think you're something special? His voice shook slightly, betraying the fear now creeping in. Emily's hand rested lightly on her glass, her eyes steady. Special isn't what you call it, she said quietly, almost conversationally. It's resilience. It's survival. It's honor. Something you'll recognize only when you've faced more than words and discomfort. Until then, you're entitled only to your ignorance. Her words, calm but precise, reverberated in the room. The corner man's confidence collapsed, leaving his friends awkwardly shuffling in their seats. The bar's energy shifted entirely. What had begun as mockery became tension, then gradually transformed into awe and recognition of her authority. Emily's presence, supported by her unwavering posture, quiet voice, and visible tattoo, had turned the tide without a single act of aggression. Emily allowed herself a brief reflection, considering the lessons of service she carried into this civilian space. Afghanistan had taught her that courage was not always loud or dramatic. It was often quiet, measured, and invisible until its impact became unmistakable. Her tattoo, etched in memory and honor, was an outward symbol of that inner strength. Here, it had become more than art. It was authority, integrity, and proof of resilience. The corner man slouched back into his chair, muttering under his breath. His friends avoided her gaze, suddenly aware of their own vulnerability. The patrons, once passive observers, now watched intently. Emily had transformed the room not with volume, but with a presence born of discipline and experience. She had demonstrated, without violence or shouting, that respect is earned through endurance, courage, and composure. As Emily took another slow sip of water, the jukebox hummed softly in the background, a distant melody underscoring the fragile calm in the room. She was aware that the night was far from over, that the potential for escalation still lingered. But for now, the initial confrontation had been neutralized. Her calm authority, reinforced by memories of service and personal resilience, had shifted the room's energy. The mocking men had lost momentum, while other patrons gained a newfound respect for the woman at the bar. And then, The sound of the door opening echoed softly through the room. Emily's head lifted, instinctively assessing the newcomer. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface began to shift once more, a subtle change in the air, signaling that the next phase of the evening was about to unfold. The door to Murphy's bar creaked open, drawing a current of attention that swept across the dimly lit room. Emily Carter's eyes lifted automatically, trained to scan her surroundings. The late summer breeze carried a hint of dust from the street, but it wasn't that which drew every gaze. A man entered, tall and upright, his shoulders broad beneath a neatly pressed coat. There was an unmistakable authority in the way he moved, a calm, measured energy that seemed to command the whole room without a word. The chatter in the bar slowed, conversations halting mid-sentence. Even the jukebox's country ballad seemed to fade into the background. Patrons instinctively straightened in their seats, sensing that someone of considerable presence had arrived. Emily's pulse quickened slightly, not from fear, but from recognition. She knew the weight of experience when she saw it. This was a man whose life had been forged in discipline, leadership, and service. His eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, assessing, measuring, acknowledging. The corner men, still bristling with residual bravado, froze mid-motion. The largest one leaned forward instinctively, expecting to assert dominance in this new presence, but the man's gaze swept over them like a physical force. It wasn't a glance of anger or confrontation. It was an appraisal of experience, a quiet authority that demanded acknowledgement. Their smirks faltered, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. The energy of the bar had shifted entirely. Emily's eyes met the newcomers, and she immediately recognized the uniform beneath the coat, a Marine colonel, retired, distinguished. Decades of service were etched into the lines of his face, visible in the set of his jaw, the steady gaze, and the medals faintly visible beneath his coat. The colonel walked toward Emily with deliberate pace, each step measured, his presence filling the room. Every patron sensed the significance. In an instant, ridicule and tension became reverence and anticipation. Without a word, the colonel stopped in front of Emily and slowly removed his coat. The gesture was quiet, almost ceremonial. Underneath, his uniform displayed the insignia of rank, service ribbons, and medals earned through decades of dedication, sacrifice, and leadership. The metallic glint caught the dim light, reflecting in the eyes of every onlooker. The effect was instantaneous. The bar's atmosphere transformed. The men who had mocked Emily earlier shrank under the weight of history and authority, realizing the magnitude of their misjudgment. Emily's chest rose slightly with controlled pride. The colonel didn't speak immediately. He simply regarded her, eyes steady, unflinching, carrying a depth of understanding that transcended words. The subtle nod he gave was acknowledgement, recognition of courage, resilience, and composure. Emily understood perfectly. The silent communication between Marines, forged over shared experiences and sacrifices, needed no articulation. A single look conveyed respect, solidarity, and validation. She felt a quiet surge of gratitude and pride. The corner men exchanged nervous glances, their confidence crumbling further. The leader of the group opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. The colonel's presence alone rendered mockery meaningless. Even the more subdued patrons shifted in their seats, eyes wide, sensing the weight of the moment. Emily remained seated, her posture perfect, calm, composed. She didn't need to rise to the occasion. The colonel's arrival had elevated her presence naturally, emphasizing the dignity and strength she had already exhibited. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The humming of the jukebox faded entirely, as if the bar itself held its breath. Every detail of the colonel's demeanor conveyed authority. The straightness of his posture, the deliberate way he positioned his hands, the subtle alignment of his medals reflecting decades of service. His eyes scanned the room once more, and, for a brief second, they met Emily's again. The nod this time was more pronounced, a silent acknowledgement of her endurance, her courage, and her composure under provocation. Emily allowed herself a quiet exhale. The tension that had gripped the room, the confrontation, the mocking, the whispers, began to dissolve. The corner men, once brash and confident, slouched back into their seats, their bravado evaporated. By the presence of experience and authority, they were no longer in control. The room had shifted to recognize courage, discipline, and integrity. Emily felt a surge of empowerment. Her silence and composure, validated by the colonel, had transformed the dynamics entirely. The colonel didn't speak immediately, letting the moment resonate. Patrons murmured softly to one another, realizing the significance of what had just occurred. Emily's tattoo, previously the target of ridicule, now symbolized endurance and honor under the watchful recognition of someone who had walked the same path. The significance was not lost on anyone present. The small, dimly lit bar had become a theater of recognition, respect, and unspoken solidarity. Finally, the colonel's voice broke the silence. It was quiet, measured, and authoritative. "Carry yourself with dignity," he said. "You've earned every bit of respect this room should have offered from the start." His words were aimed at Emily, but carried an implicit rebuke to the men who had mocked her. The subtle power of this statement resonated through the bar. It was not just recognition. It was an assertion of principle, a reminder that courage and composure command acknowledgement. Emily nodded slightly, allowing herself a small, controlled smile. The colonel's presence had validated not only her immediate reaction, but her personal journey, her history, and the choices that had led her to this moment. The men who had tried to belittle her avoided her gaze entirely, their earlier audacity replaced by shame and silence. The patrons now understood that respect could not be demanded. It was earned, observed, and recognized, often silently, often without grand gestures, yet profoundly impactful. The colonel's eyes lingered on Emily. For another moment, as if to convey that the unspoken bond between Marines transcended location, circumstance, and audience. Emily felt the weight of that recognition settle in her chest. The room's atmosphere had shifted completely. What had been tension, mockery, and challenge was now admiration, respect, and acknowledgement. Every subtle movement the colonel's nod, the quiet poise of Emily, the humbled posture of the mockers, told a story of endurance and honor more potent than words alone. The men at the corner table slouched further, muttering quietly. Their earlier arrogance dissipated entirely. Patrons whispered, a subtle reverence spreading like ripples across water. Emily allowed herself another controlled sip of water, her posture unshaken, her gaze steady. The colonel's silent validation reinforced her inner strength, a tangible reminder that dignity, courage, and composure were recognized by those who had the experience to see them. The jukebox music returned softly, filling the quiet spaces of the bar, yet the mood had irrevocably changed. Emily now occupied a space of authority, not through confrontation, but through the quiet acknowledgement of shared experience and the visible testament of her tattoo. The colonel remained nearby, a silent sentinel, ensuring that decorum and recognition prevailed. The lesson of the evening was unfolding. Courage, dignity, and composure are often invisible forces until recognized by those who understand their weight. Emily's thoughts drifted momentarily to the soldiers she had lost and the battles she had endured. The eagle tattoo was more than art. It was a chronicle of memory, survival, and resilience. The colonel's presence amplified its meaning, transforming it from a personal emblem to a symbol that carried weight in the room. She had faced fear and ridicule before, but this moment was a rare and profound affirmation of the principles She had lived by courage, composure, and quiet authority. As the colonel adjusted his coat and surveyed the room one final time, Emily allowed herself a brief smile, knowing that she had not only maintained her dignity, but had earned recognition. In a space that had initially challenged her, the men who had mocked her had learned an invaluable lesson. True respect is earned, not assumed. And Emily, Sergeant Carter, had shown them exactly how that respect manifests, not through anger, not through words, but through enduring composure, quiet strength, and the unspoken power of experience. The room fell into a silence, so thick it felt almost tangible. Murphy's bar, which had been alive with murmurs, laughter, and casual chatter just moments before, now seemed to exist in a bubble of respect. Emily Carter remained seated at the bar, posture impeccable, fingers lightly resting around her water glass. She did not speak, did not flinch, did not relax entirely. Her composure was deliberate, calibrated, a visible manifestation of the discipline instilled in her through years of military service. Yet beneath the calm, she felt the quiet satisfaction of having reclaimed control without a word of aggression. The colonel remained standing nearby, a silent sentinel, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades assessing people, situations, and environments. He had entered this bar not to intervene aggressively, but to establish the presence of authority, and it had worked. Emily had already demonstrated courage, patience, and dignity, but his presence amplified her influence. The patrons now recognized her as someone whose life experience demanded attention and respect, whether or not they understood the battles she had fought. The corner table, previously a source of ridicule and tension, had fallen into awkward silence. The largest man, once brash and overconfident, avoided Emily's gaze entirely. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering quietly amongst themselves. Their earlier mocking had been transformed into discomfort, uncertainty, and subtle embarrassment. Emily could see it in their body language, the shoulders slumping, hands fidgeting, the eyes darting toward the floor rather than meeting hers. She knew that for many of them, this was the first time they had encountered someone whose authority was grounded in experience rather than loud words. Emily's eyes swept the bar once more. She noted subtle reactions from patrons seated further away, an elderly couple adjusting their chairs to see her better, a group of young men whispering with astonishment, and even the bartender who had quietly polished glasses throughout the evening. Each of these small gestures conveyed recognition of her dignity and composure. In her world, these micro-acknowledgments were as meaningful as a medal. They signified understanding, respect, and validation of the life she had led. The colonel's gaze returned to Emily. He offered a small, deliberate nod, acknowledging her presence, her calm in the face of mockery, and her unwavering dignity. Emily returned the nod subtly, a quiet exchange of mutual understanding that transcended words. The air between them held a resonance built from shared experience, a recognition that courage, discipline, and composure were universal languages, understood by those who had walked similar paths. It was a moment of silent affirmation, both for Emily and for the bar as a whole. For the men who had attempted to provoke her, the lesson was now unavoidable. Their arrogance had been confronted not with yelling, but with composure and a subtle reinforcement of authority. Emily's tattoo, which had once drawn mockery, now symbolized endurance, sacrifice, and strength. The eagle, wings outstretched, and clutching an olive branch, seemed almost alive in the dim lighting, a sentinel watching over her and the bar. They could see the meaning, even if they could not fully grasp its depth. A few patrons whispered quietly, exchanging comments about the transformation in the room. "Did you see her? She didn't even have to yell," one murmured. "And the colonel just standing there. It changed everything," replied another. Emily overheard these fragments, allowing herself a small, private satisfaction. Recognition did not need fanfare. It came in subtle shifts, in body language, in quiet acknowledgement. She had demonstrated that strength was not always loud, that courage could be understated, yet utterly undeniable. The largest man at the corner table finally broke the silence, voice low and uncertain. Sorry, I guess," he muttered, not meeting Emily's eyes. His apology was awkward, hesitant, a stark contrast to the arrogance he had displayed just moments before. The Colonel's presence, combined with Emily's steadfast composure, had dismantled his false bravado entirely. Emily accepted the apology with a subtle nod, her calm demeanor never wavering. There was no need for further confrontation. The lesson had been imparted quietly, efficiently, and irrevocably. Emily's mind drifted briefly to the soldiers she had served alongside, those she had lost, and the battles that had shaped her. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of connection. The Colonel's silent acknowledgement, the respect from patrons, and the subdued behavior of the men who had mocked her, all mirrored the subtle dynamics of a battlefield, where courage, authority, and respect are recognized in nuanced ways rather than loud declarations. Her experiences had prepared her not just for combat, but for life's unexpected confrontations. The rune's energy began to shift from tension to quiet reflection. Patrons who had been spectators now carried themselves with a subtle admiration, their awareness of Emily's presence heightened. Conversations resumed, but at a softer, more respectful tone. Even the jukebox seemed less intrusive, its melody weaving into the atmosphere rather than dominating it. Emily sipped her water slowly, letting the subtle rhythm of acknowledgement wash over her. Each gesture, each whisper, reinforced the quiet authority she had established. The Colonel remained nearby, silently monitoring the dynamics. He had entered this space to ensure that respect prevailed, and it had been achieved. Emily, seated and composed, was now the focal point of that respect. She recognized that the lesson extended beyond the immediate situation. It was an affirmation of the values she lived by: courage, integrity, patience, and the understated power of presence. Her tattoo, once a target for ridicule, had become a beacon, silently conveying resilience and honor. Emily's gaze drifted to the corner men one final time. Their posture had changed, subtly, shoulders slouched, eyes downcast, hands folded or fidgeting. The largest man avoided eye contact entirely, a visible symbol of submission to authority earned through experience rather than force. Emily did not gloat. There was no triumph in humiliation. Her victory lay in quiet dignity, the ability to transform tension into recognition without anger, aggression, or escalation. She had maintained control and imparted a lesson that would linger far longer than a shouted insult ever could. Time seemed to stretch. Patrons now spoke in hushed tones, some nodding subtly in acknowledgement, others watching with newfound curiosity. Emily felt a quiet pride, not from external validation, but from knowing she had maintained integrity, composure, and courage in the face of provocation. The Colonel's presence had amplified the moment, but her own strength had drawn it into focus. She realized once more that authority, courage, and respect are often quiet forces, observed and felt more than loudly declared. Finally, the Colonel adjusted his coat, subtly signaling that his part in this lesson was complete. His eyes lingered on Emily for a brief moment longer, a final silent acknowledgement of her dignity and resilience. He then moved to the bar counter, subtly positioning himself near the doorway, a quiet reminder that order and authority were still present. Emily allowed herself a small, controlled smile, recognizing that the bar's dynamics had been irrevocably altered. The corner men remained subdued, whispering quietly among themselves, unsure how to resume normal conversation. Emily took another slow sip of water, her posture perfect, her gaze steady. She had weathered the storm, commanded respect, and ensured that dignity prevailed. Her tattoo, once a symbol of personal memory and sacrifice, now carried a visible weight of authority. Patrons who had observed the unfolding events would not soon forget it. The colonel's presence remained a subtle reassurance, but Emily recognized that the real impact came from her own composure, courage, and quiet authority. The lesson imparted was profound. Respect is earned, courage is recognized, and dignity is maintained through calm and steadfast action. Emily's story, silently told through her tattoo, posture, and demeanor, had transformed the room. The bar was no longer a place of mockery. It had become a space of acknowledgement and quiet reverence. As Emily prepared to finish her drink, she reflected on the evening so far. The men who had mocked her were humbled. The patrons had observed a demonstration of courage and integrity, and the colonel's presence had validated her experience. Every detail, from the faint glint of her tattoo to the subtle nods of acknowledgement, reinforced the quiet power of composure, patience, and resilience. The room had shifted irrevocably, and Emily had been at the center of that transformation, a silent force of recognition and respect. The atmosphere in Murphy's bar had undergone a transformation so complete it was almost palpable. The tension that had gripped the room like a coiled spring had dissolved into quiet reflection and acknowledgement. Emily Carter remained seated at the bar, her eagle tattoo fully visible beneath the dim lights, radiating authority without a single word spoken. Patrons shifted in their seats, whispering quietly, exchanging glances, and subtly nodding in recognition. The corner men, once emboldened by arrogance, now sat slouched, subdued, uncertain how to respond. Emily's eyes swept the room with calm assurance. She knew the colonel's presence had amplified her authority, but the real shift had occurred through her own composure, her unwavering posture, and the quiet strength of her experience. She had faced challenges far greater than ridicule, and it showed in every deliberate movement, every measured glance. The bar had become a microcosm of a battlefield, where respect and authority were earned not through volume, but through discipline, courage, and integrity. The largest man at the corner table fidgeted. His bravado evaporated entirely. I didn't realize," he began, voice hesitant, faltering under the weight of unspoken recognition. Emily allowed herself a subtle nod, acknowledging the beginning of comprehension without condescension. It was a lesson delivered quietly, but effectively. Courage and composure command respect, while arrogance and mockery leave only vulnerability in their wake. A young couple seated nearby leaned closer, whispering softly. "She didn't even have to fight back," the woman said, awe evident in her tone. "And that colonel, he just made it clear." Emily caught the fragment and allowed a small private smile. Recognition didn't always need to be loud. It came in glances, whispers, and subtle shifts in posture. In this bar, she had commanded attention and earned respect through restraint, integrity, and unwavering calm. Emily's mind drifted to her squad overseas, to nights under the desert sky, the weight of duty heavy on her shoulders. She remembered moments when subtle leadership had been more effective than any loud order, when patience, observation, and calm decisiveness had prevented disaster. The colonel's silent acknowledgement mirrored the understanding she had shared with her comrades in Afghanistan. This was the language of experience, unspoken yet profoundly recognized, and now it had been translated into a civilian context. The corner men whispered amongst themselves, their earlier confidence replaced by embarrassment and hesitance. The largest one finally muttered, barely audible, We shouldn't have mocked her." Emily allowed herself a faint nod, her posture unflinching, her gaze steady. There was no need for further confrontation. The lesson had been delivered, quietly but decisively. Respect had been earned, and it radiated through the room, subtle but unmistakable. The Colonel, standing slightly to the side, observed the shift. With a calm satisfaction. He had entered not to dominate, but to reinforce authority and ensure order. Emily's own composure had made his presence almost ceremonial, a silent partnership in asserting respect and dignity. Patrons sensed it. This was not a display of power, but of earned authority. Emily had commanded the room through discipline, courage, and integrity, amplified by the quiet validation of a seasoned Marine officer. Emily traced the outline of her eagle tattoo subtly with her eyes. Each feather represented resilience, each line a memory of sacrifice, camaraderie, and survival. Her experiences overseas had been etched into her very being, and now, in this civilian space, they were recognized in small, meaningful ways. The tattoo, once a target of ridicule, had become a symbol of endurance and quiet authority. Patrons and onlookers understood the unspoken story it carried, even if only subconsciously. A gentle shift occurred among the regulars at the bar. They began to treat Emily with subtle deference, offering nods, polite glances, and quiet acknowledgement. Even the bartender, who had maintained a professional neutrality throughout the evening, allowed a faint smile of recognition. Emily's quiet authority had permeated the room. She had transformed ridicule into reflection, confrontation into acknowledgement, and chaos into quiet order. The corner men, still seated, now exchanged glances filled with discomfort and tentative respect. Their earlier arrogance had dissolved completely. Emily recognized the subtle shift not as triumph over others, but as evidence of the quiet power of composure and integrity. There was no need for further confrontation. The lesson had been absorbed. Courage and dignity had spoken louder than any insult, and those who had tried to provoke her now recognized it. Emily's thoughts drifted again to the soldiers she had served alongside. Private Torres, Corporal Daniels, and countless others had taught her the subtle power of presence, patience, and observation. The battlefield often required endurance, beyond the physical, mental, and emotional resilience could determine survival. Now, in this bar, she realized the lesson was universal. Dignity and strength commanded recognition in any setting, whether under fire or facing ridicule. The Colonel's presence continued to anchor the room. Patrons and onlookers, previously uncertain, now understood the stakes. Respect was earned, authority recognized, and courage observed. Emily's tattoo, her posture, and her calm gaze communicated more than words could. The men who had mocked her had been humbled. The spectators had witnessed a display of authentic strength. The bar itself seemed to shift, as if acknowledging the new balance of energy. Emily took another slow sip of water, feeling the quiet weight of the evening settle around her. Her presence, the Colonel's validation, and the subtle acknowledgement from patrons had shifted the room entirely. The mocking men had been neutralized without aggression, and respect had been quietly restored. Emily understood the power of restraint, the influence of composure, and the resonance of silent authority. The room gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though the shift lingered. Conversations resumed in subdued tones. Patrons adjusted their behavior, reflecting subtle awareness of the authority present. Emily's posture remained impeccable, her gaze steady. The Colonel lingered nearby, a silent guardian of the order now established. Emily recognized that the dynamic in the bar had changed permanently. She had demonstrated that courage, dignity, and composure were universally recognized forces. Finally, the Colonel moved toward the door, adjusting his coat and offering Emily a final nod of acknowledgement. It was the culmination of silent understanding, a partnership of recognition and authority that needed no words. Emily allowed herself a brief, private smile. The men who had mocked her were subdued, the patrons enlightened in small ways, and the room had been transformed. Emily reflected on the lessons embedded in the evening. Courage and composure had created change without aggression. Her tattoo had become a symbol of resilience, honor, and silent authority. The Colonel's presence had validated her journey, amplifying the impact. But the shift had been achieved through her own poise and discipline. The lesson was clear. Dignity commands. Respect, experience earns recognition, and quiet authority resonates beyond words. As Emily prepared to leave the bar, she allowed herself a final glance around the room. Patrons observed her with a mix of admiration and curiosity, the cornermen with lingering respect. The subtle power of composure, patience, and quiet strength had transformed a tense, mocking situation into one of recognition, reflection, and acknowledgement. Emily Carter had not only defended her dignity, she had demonstrated the universal truth of earned respect. The bar had returned to its routine rhythm, but the air felt subtly altered, charged with the quiet echoes of the confrontation that had just passed. Emily Carter sat at her usual spot at the bar, posture still impeccable, her eagle tattoo catching the dim overhead light. The room now regarded her differently, not as a newcomer, not as a woman who had drawn ridicule, but as a figure of resilience, composure, and quiet authority. Every subtle nod, every glance of acknowledgement reinforced what she already knew. Dignity commands respect. Emily's eyes scanned the room one last time. The corner men, once bold and brazen, now slouched in their seats, subdued by the lesson they had received. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced by a tentative, almost awkward reverence. They whispered to one another, muttering apologies. Too low for most to hear. A subtle recognition of the imbalance of experience and authority. Emily did not gloat. There was no triumph in humiliation. The power of the evening lay in subtlety, in restraint, and in the quiet assertion of integrity. Her gaze shifted briefly to the bartender, who had been the silent observer throughout the ordeal. He offered a faint, approving smile, a nod of acknowledgement. That conveyed respect without intrusion. Emily allowed herself a private smile in return. Small affirmations, unobtrusive yet powerful, carried more weight than overt applause. In the quiet exchange, she felt the resonance of solidarity, the same quiet connection she had shared with comrades in distant deserts, when life depended on unspoken understanding and trust. The Colonel, who had remained a quiet sentinel through the previous tense moments, now adjusted his coat and prepared to leave. He approached Emily, each step deliberate, exuding the same calm authority that had transformed the room moments ago. When he reached her, he paused, eyes locking with hers in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. There was no need for words. Decades of shared understanding, mutual respect, and experience conveyed everything necessary. Emily inclined her head, slightly, acknowledging the Colonel's recognition, gratitude, and quiet validation. "Carry yourself with dignity," the Colonel said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was calm, steady, resonant with authority, yet gentle in its delivery. "You've earned respect tonight, not just from me, but from everyone here. And you've done it without raising your voice or losing your composure." His words were deliberate, each syllable weighted with experience and truth. Emily listened, absorbing the gravity of the recognition. It was more than acknowledgement. It was affirmation of her choices, her resilience, and the life she had built through courage and perseverance. The cornermen remained seated, silently aware of the Colonel's presence. Their earlier mocking had been thoroughly dismantled, and the gravity of his authority made it impossible for them to continue. They offered no further words, no gestures, nothing beyond the subtle shift of posture that betrayed humility and dawning comprehension. Emily allowed herself to relax slightly. The confrontation, once tense and charged with hostility, had now reached a full resolution. Respect had been earned, dignity maintained, and recognition secured, the patrons of the bar, who had witnessed the drama unfold, now carried a quiet reverence in their movements. Conversations resumed, but the undertone had shifted. Whispers of admiration, curiosity, and respect filled the space. Some had leaned in closer to observe Emily's composure. Others subtly gestured toward the colonel as a figure of authority, while the more observant recognized the layered dynamics of courage, restraint, and recognition that had played out in silence. Emily sensed it all, feeling the subtle transformation ripple through the room. She allowed herself a brief internal reflection. The events of the evening mirrored the lessons she had learned overseas. Courage, integrity, and composure were universal forces, whether wielded on a battlefield or in a dimly lit bar. Respect was not demanded. It was earned through presence, discipline, and moral clarity. Emily's tattoo, the eagle clutching an olive branch, had become more than a memorial or symbol. It was a tangible representation of her life experiences, her sacrifices, and her ability to stand unwavering in the face of challenge. The colonel straightened, preparing to leave. Before stepping toward the door, he glanced back at Emily one final time. His eyes conveyed the weight of shared understanding, the quiet acknowledgement of someone who had proven her mettle not through volume, but through calm mastery of herself and the environment. Emily returned his gaze, a subtle nod of gratitude, and recognition passing silently between them. The colonel's departure would not diminish the impact he had made. It only highlighted the authority Emily had earned through her own poise and courage. The corner men, still at their table, muttered apologies just loud enough for Emily to hear. We didn't mean—" their words faltered. Emily allowed a small, measured nod, signaling that acknowledgement was sufficient. She felt no need to respond further. The lesson had been internalized, the balance restored. Courage had triumphed not through confrontation, but through patience, resilience, and presence. Her quiet authority had prevailed, and the men would carry the memory of this evening far longer than any loud argument could have achieved. Emily took another slow sip of water, savoring the moment of stillness and reflection. The room had shifted, irrevocably. Patrons who had observed the events now carried themselves with subtle respect. The atmosphere was one of recognition and acknowledgement, rather than tension or mockery. Emily understood that her composure, her tattoo, and the colonel's validation had created a new dynamic, one in which dignity and courage were honored. Naturally, without fanfare, her mind wandered briefly to memories of her squad, nights under foreign stars, the weight of responsibility pressing down, and the small, quiet acts of leadership that preserved life. In this civilian space, those same principles had manifested differently, but with equal potency. Patience, composure, restraint, and integrity had transformed an environment from hostility to respect. Emily recognized that courage was universal, and that its demonstration transcended context, audience, and circumstance. The jukebox continued to hum softly, but its melody no longer dominated the bar. Conversations resumed, but at a more subdued, respectful pace. Patrons exchanged glances, some sharing quiet admiration for Emily's poise, others reflecting on the subtle authority displayed by the colonel. The room had become a microcosm of a world where dignity commands recognition, where courage is observed quietly, and where respect is earned through composure and moral clarity. Finally, Emily set down her glass and rose from the bar. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, and graceful. Patrons instinctively gave her space, some offering small nods or polite glances of acknowledgement. The corner men, now fully subdued, shifted uneasily but silently allowed her passage. Emily's eagle tattoo caught the light one final time, a visible testament to her resilience, courage, and the journey that had brought her to this moment. She approached the door, the weight of the evening settling around her. The colonel had already departed, leaving her with the quiet authority she had earned entirely on her own. Emily paused briefly at the threshold, glancing back at the bar. The room had been transformed. Ridicule replaced by recognition, arrogance replaced by humility, tension replaced by respect. The subtle power of composure, patience, and presence had triumphed over mockery, and the lesson had been silently, irrevocably communicated. As she stepped out into the cool night, Emily felt a sense of vindication. Not because she had silenced others, but because she had remained true to herself, demonstrating the principles that had guided her life: courage, resilience, integrity, and composure under pressure. Her tattoo, once a target of derision, now symbolized not only her personal journey, but the universal truth that respect is earned through steadfastness, dignity, and silent authority. Emily walked into the night, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The events of the evening would linger in the minds of those who had witnessed them, a subtle reminder that courage and composure are forces recognized universally. She had not only defended her dignity, but had transformed the environment around her, leaving behind a story of silent vindication, quiet strength, and enduring respect. The night air felt crisp against her skin, a symbolic cleansing after hours of tension, confrontation, and eventual resolution. Emily's thoughts returned briefly to the eagle tattoo, to the squad she had served with, and to the lessons of courage and resilience that would guide her always. She knew that respect, once earned through quiet strength, was permanent, could not be undone by words or mockery. As she disappeared into the streets, the bar behind her hummed softly with life, now quieter, more reflective. Patrons would remember this evening for years, not because of conflict or drama, but because of the demonstration of dignity, courage, and quiet authority. Emily Carter had walked through ridicule and emerged not only unshaken but vindicated, leaving behind a story of resilience, respect, and unwavering composure.